Well, hello, everybody. Mike Townsend and Tamara Splitter from American Cycling Network. Uh, we are going to be talking about a great subject today. We were just talking off camera, and I think that Tamara is going to be able to clear some things up. A lot of confusion around training zones. And so, Tamara, how you doing today, by the way?
I'm really good, Mike. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing good. Still injured, but getting better. Thank you for the last two training sessions that you put in for me. Feel like I'm starting over, but this is interesting stuff we're going to talk about. Before we get started, though, on how to better understand training zones, I want to talk and give kudos to Tamara. She's a licensed cycling coach with both the USA Cycling and United Endurance Sports Coaching Academy. She's coached a lot of athletes. I'm one of them. Not that I'm an athlete, but and at a national level. And so she is coaching me to try to get back into shape to compete in the Senior Olympics. And I was telling someone, you like this, Tamara, I was telling someone today, I said, do you know the difference in the Olympic, like the Olympics that we see every 4 years and the Senior Olympics? And they said, no, what is it? And I said, well, the Senior Olympics is more competitive.
Yeah,
Because man, these guys just in the state qualifier were just crazy. But anyway, Tamara's coached a lot of different athletes at the national level. She's a triathlon coach. She's qualified athletes to world championships. She has been a lifetime competitive athlete. She's heavily involved in the virtual cycling as well as a ride leader and racer with the U.S. military esports. As an athlete, Tamara lives for a challenge in both endurance and climbing, both in the IRL and virtual. And her website is Ignite Sports Performance Coaching. Remember that it's Ignite sportsperformancecoaching.com, all one word. All right, Tamara. So, first question, we'll just go ahead and get started. Can you explain the various training zones, the power, HR, or both?
yeah. Training zones are simply intensity levels. And so that could be based on power, or
Mhm.
it could be based on heart rate,
Heart
or
rate.
it can be based on your rate of perceived exertion or your RPE. So we use it to structure training, to put into endurance training or VO2 or tempo, that kind of training, lactic threshold type training. So they're important to have accurate training zones so that you can program the training.
So, should I go by the power or the heart rate? We were talking about that earlier because right now with this injury, my heart rate's all out of kilter. So, which one matters the most, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
So that's kind of a loaded question for me. I don't really use heart rate training unless someone is very, very new. I might give them some heart rate. I find that very conditioned athletes, myself, quite a few of my athletes that I coach, I won't, when I say zone two training, that's the buzzword lately. I don't give heart rate zone two. I give power based zone two. So your heart rate training, when you're doing efforts, that your heart rate can lag behind the effort, whereas with power, it's instantaneous, right? It's dependent upon the power that you're placing on the pedals that you're putting through your legs. So power is instantaneous, whereas with heart rate, there's a lag. It can be up to,
Uh,
15, 30 seconds before the heart
right.
rate
Catches up.
responds.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm really not so much a fan of a heart rate training. I do
Okay.
majority of my training is power training.
Okay. So I know that you've recommended that I get a power meter, and I'll eventually do that for my
Yeah.
road bike. But
Yeah.
I guess I've gotten so conditioned when I was a runner at the measuring that heart rate. I knew I had to keep it within a certain rhythm,
Mhm.
and I figured it out on a bike. For the high 40s, low 150s is a good tempo for me. When I'm riding at that heart rate, and then if I'm doing a climb and I'm pushing the pedals pretty hard, it'll jump up to the high 160s. But if I'm trying to go for a KOM, we were talking earlier, it'll
Mhm.
jump up in the 180s. I even
Yeah.
had one time it went to 195 in a KOM. So you're saying the power meter is a better predictor at that endurance part of it.
Yes,
Okay.
it is better for analyzing. Yeah, it is something that you do a lot of riding outside. I would encourage you to look into. Power pedals are probably a cheaper option to go. I mean, nothing is cheap, but I'm just saying it's probably a cheaper option to go over the power crank.
Okay. All
Mhm.
right. So, what is the difference between having a rider train in their heart rate or their power zone?
Well, again, like I was just saying there, a very, very conditioned athlete training in, say, zone two training
Hmm.
can, my heart rate, I'll have to give myself as an example. My resting heart rate is like 42.
Right.
For me to get my heart rate into zone two, I am working really, really hard. So I prefer when I want that endurance-based effort, I prefer to give that in an actual power metric in the programming.
Okay.
So, for you, it works out well
Mhm.
when you're doing your indoor training because your
Right.
indoor trainer is able to, give you those power numbers and we're able to, program you that way. When you go outside, then I have to look at things differently. But I will personally, as a coach, give you RPE
Mhm.
rather than heart rate. I would say rate of perceived exertion on a scale of 0 to 10.
Okay. That's interesting. So, why would you choose one over the other?
Why would I? Because I don't find the heart rate to be an accurate indicator for me. And like I talked about earlier with the lag that there is with the heart rate.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, obviously, don't get me wrong. I analyze the heart rate
Hmm.
always. That's always
Yeah.
part of my analysis after the workout. But when I'm doing the programming and asking for a certain output from a client,
Yeah.
it will be power based. And
Yeah.
in the case where it can't be power based, it will be based on RPE.
Okay. Interesting. So, let's talk a little bit about FTP.
Mhm.
Uh, what exactly is it? And how often should an athlete reassess their FTP?
So FTP is short for functional threshold.
Mhm.
Uh, the actual gold standard test is a 60-minute test. So that's an all-out effort as hard as you can go for
60.
60 minutes.
I thought it
That's
was
a
20.
terrible, terrible thing to do.
I thought it was 20.
Terrible.
Last time I did one, it was 20.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, like if you it's your actual hardest effort you can do for 60 minutes.
Yeah.
It's not reasonable.
Okay.
So, they came up with this calculation where you do it over 20 minutes and then
Hmm.
take 95% of what your average watts was over that 20 minutes, and that's an estimate of what your functional threshold power is.
Wow. That's amazing. Wow. And so, how often should we test it? Every.
Every 6 to 12 weeks.
Hmm.
And I say that, loosely. Oftentimes what'll happen is you'll see the signs, that it's time to retest it, or, I'll gauge like at what particular point in the training is the athlete in. FTP is something that you really want to make sure that you have an accurate FTP when you're going into, really structured hard training over, the off season type training as you're starting to ramp things up. Oftentimes we see the FTP will naturally recalculate itself as the athlete is, progressing through. So, anytime you put a hard 20-minute effort out, if you've got a new number, it's going to update that for us.
Okay. Interesting.
Mhm.
So, why does an accurate FTP matter when you design a training program for somebody when you're doing that?
Oh, it's absolutely critical because that's how all the training zones are based on. So, let's just use a round number and say your FTP is 300. everything is then calculated based on whether you use 5 training zones or 7 training zones. If I'm, wanting to calculate that my client is to be in tempo or zone 3, it's taking a percentage off of what that FTP is. So if the FTP is wrong, we have a problem because if it's too low, then they're not working hard enough. And if
Right.
it's too high, then they're working too
Too
hard.
hard.
And then sometimes, we have these programs, virtual programs like you use with Zwift
Hmm.
that integrates with Training Peaks. So
Right.
if I'm designing a program for you in Training Peaks, this is actually really important because a lot of people don't realize this happens sometimes. And say the FTP in Training Peaks is at 300, but that's based on, say, outdoor rides. And then you go on Zwift and unbeknownst to you, your FTP in Zwift is set at 250. It'll be all wonky when you go and bring the training program over into Zwift. So that's something that you need to make sure of if you're using a virtual training program
Hmm.
together with your training peaks to make sure that both the FTPs match.
I see. That's interesting. So, are there signs that an athlete's FTP is increased even without a formal FTP test? There are.
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
They'll have a lower heart rate while they're doing the training. They'll report in that training felt easier. It was, didn't seem as much of an effort. Heart rate was lower.
Yeah.
All of those different things, depending on what the program was. But yeah, there's usually some signs. They'll be hitting PRs all the time, that kind of thing. And then it's like, oh, okay, you're probably getting a bit stronger here.
Yeah. And then you would test them. Would you test them after that?
I would, yeah. And sometimes I'll use a standard FTP test that you would find on a virtual thing like Zwift,
Yeah.
or one that, I build, um, where I'll use an actual, say, a race situation
I
or
see.
like you're going to do the senior games, like a
Yeah.
time trial or something like that. I
Yeah.
would say, like, let's go for an FTP test while you're doing
Okay.
this. I mean,
All
that's the whole
right.
purpose
That's
of it,
cool.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool. So, what are the key goals for each of the training zones?
Um, well, I mean, you've got whether you're using 5 zones or 7 zones, you've got, going from easiest to hardest, right?
Mhm.
So you've got an active recovery or recovery zone 1. You've got zone 2, which is aerobic. That's building your aerobic engine. That's nice and endurance based. You've got your zone 3, which is your tempo. Got your zone 4, which is your FTP, your lactate threshold zone. And
Mhm.
then getting into your VO2 anaerobic, and then you're getting into your sprinting type efforts, which is your full out, all out efforts.
Okay. Yeah. And does mental focus change during training zones, you think? I would assume it would.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's really no mental focus or fatigue that you would have in something like a zone 2 or a zone 3 type, or zone 1, zone 2, moving into zone 3, maybe a little bit of moderate, making sure that you're staying in your zone.
Yeah.
You're starting to get into lactate threshold. I mean, that you're starting to burn, right? The lactate's starting to
Yeah.
build, starting to
Yeah.
hurt. And so you have to be saying to yourself, okay, I got to push through this. When you get into zone 5, VO2, zone 6, or full out sprint, those are maximal effort. You have to have your head in the game to be
Yeah.
able to perform those types of
Okay.
intervals, that type of training.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when I'm out on the road, because I don't have power meters,
Hmm.
I will I will throw a hard effort. Say I'm doing intervals,
Hmm.
or me and Jason maybe riding together, and I'm gonna lead, and I will look at my speed and my heart rate
Hmm.
on that, and so that helps me determine. Now, I know that I don't really think about the training zones. I mean, I know they're important, but I try to look at how long I can hold that speed and how long I can hold that heart rate in that, say, 2 minute interval. And then I later go back and I look at those heart rate zones without a power meter. Of course, you don't have that, and I do the same thing on my trainer, except I do look at the power. Is there a correlation? And I know that's not one of our questions, but is there? I mean, can you do it without a power meter and you get that? Because you posted the video that time about Tadej Pogačar riding the rest of the race, based on feel,
Yeah.
and he just crushed it,
Yeah.
without a computer on his bike. I mean, he was going by pure feel. Is that possible? I mean, is that
So that's where I talked about RPE, and that's why I don't use heart rate, especially because heart rate is also dependent on temperature,
Mhm.
humidity, that kind of thing. So, you were talking about a scenario where you might take a 2 mile section and you're analyzing your heart rate, you're analyzing your speed. Well,
Mhm.
that's fine, but there's other factors that go with that can. So what you're doing is you're PR focused. Whereas when you're training in zones, you're training to build certain areas for your performance. So
Yeah.
there's a difference that you really need to be aware of, right?
Okay.
So, you can't just look at, you got to look at the big picture. And so we always work backwards from, when an event is taking place or when your A race is taking place.
Mhm.
And we're working backwards and we're building the engine and we're working towards what that is. Now, when you have the training zones, you've got something to analyze, you've got something to work towards. But when you're looking at your speed, or when you're looking at your KOMs, or when you're looking at your heart rate, and you're analyzing that, I'm not saying that you can't do that, but I'm just saying that that's more focused on your own personal records,
Gotcha.
right? You're focused on, okay, well, maybe I did 26 miles an hour on this one section before, and this
Yeah.
time I did 30 miles an hour. I mean, that's a PR.
Yeah.
When we're talking about zones, we're talking about actual structured training zones that you want to hit in order to build tempo, to build lactate threshold, to build, we didn't talk about sweet spot. That's another area where it's just slightly under FTP. It's a little bit more sustainable.
Mhm.
But when we're looking at training in these zones, these are all things that are helping us build our FTP, because
Mhm.
FTP is lactate threshold. So that means that lactate is building in those muscles is very, very uncomfortable.
Right.
So what we're trying to do is build that higher so we can sustain it longer.
Right.
Right? So as we build the FTP, we are getting stronger. That's just the science of it.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. And
Mhm.
so, the goals that we have for, the 3 mile time trial of 6.5 minutes,
Mhm.
the 12-mile road race at 28 minutes.
Mhm.
And I think that's an average of 26.5 miles an hour to get to 28 minutes on 12 miles. Um, I can see where building the FTP would help me sustain that through that 28
It,
minute time frame.
it's
Yeah.
100% based on your FTP, Mike.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no That's what it's based on. So that's what we're trying to work on. Now, if you don't have a power meter, if a client says to me, I can't afford one, I don't have one, we work around that. We
Yeah.
work on RPE, but you talked about heart rate. No, that's not something that I use because there's so many factors that can affect heart rate. For example, we were talking off camera, you're recovering from surgery on your clavicle from the biking accident.
Mhm.
And so your body is designed to heal itself, and it's producing extra blood cells, all of that to go to that area and heal that. That's its job. So
Mhm.
now you're going back on the bike and you're using your legs.
Mhm.
And your heart rate is a lot higher than what you're used to. Well, the
Right.
reason being is because now it's also having to produce more blood to put in your legs. Well, now it's all confused, going, I got to put blood here, I got to put blood in the legs too. And so it's working harder.
Yeah. So after the training and the blood stops going to the legs, does it help because you with a higher heart rate, blood's going everywhere.
Right.
I mean,
It does help.
you've opened up, it's going to the brain, it's
Yep.
going throughout the body. So that I think isn't that where the body benefits is from that higher heart rate, that high heart rate?
Well, your body is benefiting from movement because what's happening is you're now pushing the blood through the body, but let's not forget the nutrition component.
Right,
So when we're feeding our body with the proper nutrition and healthy, healing, good foods,
right,
and you're pushing all that nutrient-rich blood through your body, yeah, you're going to heal a lot faster.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
I probably over. I have a plethora of nutrients in my body,
Yeah.
because I eat clean and I eat right.
Yeah.
I eat good food, healthy food, and I'm studying all the benefits of every single one that can increase the healing on this thing because I want to get back on my bike
I
outside.
know.
All right. So
Goals, right? We have goals.
speaking of outside versus inside training, what are some of the differences in the training zones for indoor versus outdoor? Because I know
Uh,
you have to on outdoor, you have to deal with wind,
yeah.
incline, you have to deal with, stopping at a stop sign. So
Yeah.
explain that to the viewers.
Yeah. So, and just like you said, so when you're on an indoor trainer, you don't have to deal with traffic. You don't have to deal with weather. You don't have to deal with stop signs or lights or anything like that, wind, rain, all of those things. So it's static. You can bang off that workout, to a T, right?
Mhm.
Especially if we talked about you're using your erg mode. I prefer not to, but there's cases where people do want to use that.
Yeah,
So yes, then it's very static and you're able to bang that off perfectly.
yeah,
But outside it just doesn't work like that.
yeah,
You are faced with, traffic. You are faced with nature. You are, um, stop signs, weather, all of those
yeah.
things. Now, hills, yeah, so I mean we can mimic hills indoors as well, but
Right.
there is a difference. I do find being inside, riding inside, for me, the training is a little bit harder because you're constantly working.
Yeah,
You don't have those
yeah,
variables, right? But
yeah,
then that being said, when you're outside, you might have a really strong headwind and have to work harder
yeah.
too. So, it just depends what's going on. But there's a definite difference that we do see in
Mhm.
the watts, in the actual workout when it comes back into Training Peaks for an analysis.
Yeah,
It, when I look at one that is structured and being done inside, all those intervals are perfectly executed. When I look at that same workout and I give it outside, it's all over the place. And then, but I
right.
have to look at that and know that they were outside.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I like working out on the inside for multiple reasons. You mentioned some of them. Uh,
See?
yeah, I mean, but the hardest part is for me, there is no downtime on the trainer,
No.
whereas you can coast on the bike on outside.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, and so big to me, it's a huge difference in the effort and how I feel like I'm getting better. I guess I like training on the inside, and then I test it on the outside to see how I'm doing.
That said, I mean, I don't think I've ever heard from anyone that they didn't feel stronger when they went outside. So I
Yeah,
always hear, whether it's a client or whether it's someone on my race team, I always hear the same thing. I feel stronger when I'm outside. I know I personally feel stronger when I'm outside because of the training that I do inside.
yeah, that's good.
Hmm. Hmm.
Good stuff. That's all the questions we have. It's good information. If anyone has any more questions, they can put it in the comments. But Tamara, thanks so much for your time. It's always a pleasure. If people would, if they would like, share, and subscribe this channel, it would certainly help us. But we've got a big race coming up, ride. It's not really a race coming up this Saturday in East Tennessee. It starts at a beautiful college, Maryville College. If you haven't signed up, it's not too late, but it's a tough effort. I hate that I'm going to miss it. And then the week after, we have the Cherahalla Challenge. I'm actually wearing last year's T-shirt, and I know Greg is going to be in that one. Jason's going to be in it,
Hmm.
but I have to miss that one too. But I'll
Yeah.
probably post some things. I'm going to be up there and I'll video, and I'll probably post some things on the channel about those
Right.
two rides. But yeah, it's always a pleasure, Tamara, to see you and to talk
Yeah.
to you, and always learn something, and that's always a pleasure. But thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike.
All right. You have a good one.
You as well.